All Things Alice. This podcast will explore the cultural phenomenon of Alice in Wonderland as artistic landmark and global symbol of inspiration and imagination. I'm your host, Frank Beddor, the author of the Looking Glass Wars trilogy. Let's explore, what is it about Alice? Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Today is the 21st episode, Lucky 21. So thank you for tuning in. And today I'm delighted to have yet another talented guest joining us, Rocco Rotunno. He is a master craftsman in the world of copywriting. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this fascinating niche of the entertainment business, don't worry, we're going to get right into it because he's worked on some massive stuff. The Sopranos, one of my favorite shows, Succession, Game of Thrones, and of course, a few of my projects, a couple of my titles I was struggling with, and I reached out to him, so he saved me. We're going to talk about that. So settle in as we peer through the looking glass to get a behind-the-scenes peek at how the taglines and titles you know so well and love are created. Hey, Rocco, mastermind of the tagline, welcome to the show. Good to see you, man.
Oh, it's nice to see you. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, for sure.
I was looking up today our first project. It's been a while, but we go back to February of '97.
What? Yeah,
Yes,
Wicked, right?
I know. You look the same, fortunately.
You're a charmer. You're a charmer.
It was for the second wife.
Yes.
A can sell sheet. It's kind of a little bit like why I'm talking today is, talking about trying to market a film. And that film also was retitled, which is another thing that I sort of do. It featured Julia Stiles, as you recall, in a small sort of a breakout role.
Well, actually, she had the starring role, and what was interesting about the movie was the guy who played her dad was technically kind of the star.
Right.
Because he was more well known. But Julia was clearly going to be a movie star because we started shooting that film at the end of 96, 97, we were finishing, and I just did not like that title, The Second Wife.
Yeah.
Anything with wife felt, it felt always going to be a melodrama about divorce. So I came to you to retitle it, correct? Or
well, actually, I don't think it was part of that. What I was a part of was coming up with a synopsis for your one sheet, or not one sheet, a sell sheet, I think, for Can. So that's part of what we were, meant to be talking about, and that, there's so many different things that go into promoting a film. And in this case, I think you were, trying to get some sales, some, and some press. So the film was done, so all the information about the entire story was there, and then just wanted to have something. So I think you probably ended up having some art of some kind on the front, maybe a little line, and then and I assume at the time before you changed it, the title, and then in the back there was just like a one-page synopsis giving people that might want to buy it or might want to show it an idea of what the film's about. Now, the irony, and I think I mentioned one time to you, that was that when you invited me to the screening, my wife and I happened to be sitting in back of Julia Stiles, and she was really, really good. And you could tell she had a career. And I kind of tapped her on the shoulder afterwards, and I said, well, congratulations on your brilliant coming career. And the ironic thing was that about 6 months or maybe a year later, I got an assignment to work on 10 Things I Hate About You, which was for Disney Touchstone. So that came out probably was filmed in 98 after your film, came out in 99. And breakout star that she happened to be with another unknown guy named Heath Ledger.
Yes, little known guy, Heath Ledger.
I know, and it was just a great vehicle for them. It was basically a teen rom-com, and Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew, Takeoff, and they did a great job. And it's just one of those things rare for me to have been in the ground floor of, seeing someone's beginning of someone's career. And that was a nice opportunity. And the reason I mentioned is that's our first project together. So.
Well, one of the reasons, Rocco, that I love doing this podcast is because often I learn more about my fellow writers, certain their backstory, and I also like to discover their career path and the creative process. And your career and your job is really fascinating because I don't think it gets as much press because you guys are behind the scenes. And what's also interesting is you're a freelance, emphasis on free, which
Not the price, just the
what's that?
No. Not the price, but just the
yes, not the price, but the freedom part. And part of being a writer is the upside of is that freedom, as long as the price is high enough. It just seems like a really cool job to work in freelance advertising, where your focus is coming up with taglines and retitles, titles, copy for trailers. I mean, just kind of walk us through all the different things that you're called upon as a freelance writer in the marketing of television and movies.
Well, thank you for synopsizing what I do. It is kind of unsung, and I'd like to, appreciate you letting me sing a little about what I do, what a lot of other writers like myself do. First, I have to say that we are not, well, at least I am not, but I would assume most of the writers that do what I do, we're not in a union and not part of, what's going on now with the writer's strike, which I think is, if I was doing that, I'd certainly be on the line. It really is, they are sung in some ways, and they do get, nominated for awards and that. But again, everything really starts, with the written word. I can't do what I do without that. And so, a little anecdote, which, there's actually two. One is that we had an acquaintance of my wife's, and she had known her for, a few years. And one day, they were getting a little closer, and she said, "So what is it exactly that your husband does?" And so my wife tried to explain, well, he kind of writes promotional copy and lines for films. It's kind of film marketing, film advertising. I think she gave her one of my lines, which I'm not going to say, but let's give you a good one. The famous line from Alien. So you have a poster where you don't really know what's going on. They were real careful not to show the creature. And the poster line was, "In space, no one can hear you scream," which is brilliant. It tells you everything. It tells you it's in space, right? It tells you it's horror in a upscale way, not in a slasher
way, right?
And it really encapsulates, and it really did the heavy lifting. And so the woman, paused for a second. She says, "So he gets paid for that?" And and so what I do is basically, like I said, it starts with the written word, or at least some sort of a concept of what a project is going to be about. And I'll either read a script, or in some cases, there may be a semi-finished version of the film or TV show. And so I'll read or watch that. And, I'll make my notes about what I think it's about, or what are, some important things. But in general, what happens is that the advertising end of it really is left to the studio's marketing departments. And marketing's gone back to the very beginning of film. I mean, you could probably have a, Nickelodeon, and somebody would have a sandwich board and say, "This is the greatest, Western ever," or something. And the whole idea is just trying to get people in the seats. And that's changed as movies and TV and everything have changed over the years. And maybe a lot of people are still confused as to not only what we do, but how much they actually spend, because, it's often you see in an ad where, a film has cost $150 million. And then first couple of weeks, they may make 300 million. And so most people would say, "Wow, they're really doing well. They already made everything back, and, everyone's getting money." I don't want to go into Hollywood accounting, as you know. You could have a whole thesis.
Yes, we could put everybody to sleep for sure.
Yeah, who doesn't get paid? They made $1 billion and there's no profits. But the point being that you could see, oh, they made this and it's twice what they spent. There's got to be money. What the studio genuinely can say is that, and truthfully can say, is that, well, we spent about 100 million or more marketing the film, and people don't realize that, yes, there are costs for ads going on TV. There are costs for, as you mentioned earlier, the trailers that are in the theaters, the objects, all the print objects, the standees, the outdoor billboards. The mainly work on is one sheets, which are basically the 27 by 41 posters that you see in the theaters. And they are the vehicle that, kind of introduces something to people. And so the copy part hopefully gives you some sort of an incentive to want to come and see the film.
I mean, that's part of what you do is coming up with clever, humorous, tonally appropriate taglines or phrases, because you're very few words. Like, I just saw the trailer. I saw a one sheet for Meg 2, the shark movie. And the tagline was "New Meg, Old Chum." Now, that's a pretty good tagline.
Right.
And you mentioned Alien, which was a classic. And you said it did the heavy lifting. And the text, when you say what did the heavy lifting, was the text, because the visual was trying to hold back the creature. And so when you're coming up with that process, I would imagine there's hundreds and hundreds of versions until the studio or whoever your partners are in the marketing, say this is the one. That's not so easy. From my standpoint, that seems really hard, which is why I always reach out to you. What are the creative elements that you use to come up with that stuff?
Well, basically, as I mentioned earlier, it starts with the written word. So I would maybe see a script, read a script, possibly see a completed or near completed version of the show or movie. And the main thing that sort of starts me off is, I'll write down things. I'll have some, information from the client, though, that in a brief, they'll say, well, we kind of want to sell the film this way. So keep an eye out for those things. We might want to use some lines from the film, maybe keep an eye out, maybe make some notes. It's that the client, and in this case, it could be someone that's from the marketing arm of the studio, but more cases than not, within the last 30 years or so, there's been a really big growth in advertising, let's call them boutiques, but they're also independent of the studios, but they work very closely with the marketing department, who works with, the directors, producers, and so on. And they kind of have an idea, maybe sometimes not so good of an idea how they want to sell the movie. And they want to touch on a lot of different things, perhaps. And they call that, what can you write to these buckets? So they might say, we have 5 ways we're thinking about this. And ultimately what happens, though, is to kind of hedge their bets a little bit, they'll also do some market research and have some focus groups. And so different things can happen along the way. They may initially want to show one thing or say one thing, and I'll be called in, and that'll be called like an exploration. That's basically the best way to put it. So a copy exploration. So while artists are working on, as I mentioned earlier, key art, and that's a long process, like you said. I think the thing is, like anything else that I had mentioned earlier, like trying to work and do lighting or trying to do costumes, or it's time intensive. You see the finished product and don't really know what goes on behind it. And I personally could work on, and 200-300 different titles to, 50 to 100, 150 taglines, come back and do some more. Other writers have done other things at other studios, and they have all this stuff to choose from. And it has to be, tested, agreed upon by a lot of people. So there's a lot of fingerprints on all that, as you know, being in the business. It's certainly not a one person job. And it takes some time to try to figure out, and it's usually more often than that ends up in the last minute. It's like, oh, we've got to get this film, we've got to get it out. It's opening tomorrow. Let's go to press. Well, basically it's happened. It's like, well, when are they going to ever finish? They're trying to figure it out. Well, it's opening in 2 weeks. So I think that's it. They just ran out of time, and then they'll have another crack at it if it goes to home entertainment, if they want to sell it a different way. And there's all those considerations too of selling for different markets. So international, that's a whole, animal on its own in terms of
how often are you restricted by space on a poster? You're competing or in tandem with the art. So for instance, we were talking about Meg 2. They only have 4 words, new Meg, old chum. And I find that fascinating because I have a whole sentence to communicate, and then a paragraph, and then a whole page. And to reduce it to a clever summation and to hit the tone, I guess my question is, do they give you a limit? Or, hey, you have to fit it into, here's this piece, here's this shark, we want it in the shark mouth? Or do they do that? Do they find the tagline in tandem with the artist or whoever is putting the key art together?
In terms of the poster, in general, less is more. And for the medium, especially for print, and then you had alluded to billboards. I mean, that's hot medium. I mean, it's like you gotta sell it like, in a second. Unless you want to get into an accident, right? So you're looking up and you're driving, and you have to hit it. And same with even a poster. I mean, there's a little bit more time to look at it. You might be strolling, down a street, you pass a theater. But I think the less you use with, it's the less with most impact, I think,
Right.
Minimum words and maximum, impact.
Okay. I want to go to some of your taglines, and I want to start with 10 Things I Hate About You, because as you pointed out, that was starring Julia Stiles and Heath Ledger before he was up and coming. And the movie, The Second Wife, Wicked, premiered at Sundance Film Festival, and Julia Stiles was really discovered at the Sundance Film Festival, which was in 1998. And she then went on, as you said, right after that to do this Disney movie, 10 Things I Hate About You, right, which you alluded to is Shakespeare's, a sort of a teen rom-com setup of Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew.
Right.
And you had to write a tagline for that. Do you remember what the tagline?
Yeah.
I know what it is.
Yeah.
I'll read it to you.
Go ahead. You read it. Yeah.
How do I loathe thee? ? Let me count the ways.
So
that's good.
And again,
that's really good because, on a romantic comedy, especially two people that clearly don't like each other come to fall in love, right? That's the essence of a romantic comedy. And in this, you nailed it with, how do I loathe thee? ? 10 things I hate about you. So it ties together beautifully a contemporary idea, taking a Shakespearean play. So just walk us through that process for you.
Yeah, it's always, I think, clients and I think the general public respond to things that are twists on something that's commonly, that is familiar. So how do I love thee? So if you could do that, that's good. Like I mentioned, writing to a bucket or something. There's also like writing to an image or a concept, which could be, in a very early stage. In other words, behind the scenes and unsung people are people that actually illustrate someone's idea. They may not have the images from the unit, the people that are actually producing the show. They may not want to, let them out.
You're talking about the photographs from the
production. The photographs behind the scenes. Yeah. And so a creative director, or like I mentioned, a boutique studio that I might work for, would have their art directors maybe pull old images but they may have these great ideas and they want them sketched up. And so there's a whole bunch of people that do just that. They're just sketch artists, and they may come up with 25 different ideas. And then they might ask me, well, can you tie something into this? And so, so there might be them in succession. It might be them at a table. It might be the golden apple that's fallen and it has, something bitten out of it. It could be on a ladder. It could be something in a stock market idea or something.
Did they do that? Did they bring all those ideas to you?
And so that's the thing, right? They'll do that. I'll write to it.
Okay.
And it'll go over, and well, it may not go over. That's the part, where they don't know. It's the people that are the producers, writers, creators, other studio people, like in this particular case, HBO, might say, you guys are, way off. Or, this is really intriguing. Can we see more exploration? Can we see a little bit more copy that's not so quite on the nose or something? And I think ultimately, as I said earlier, less is more. And so if you could tell the basic story, I think when you're doing, and unfortunately, I've been able to work on season ones of some of these shows, which is a nice thing because you get a good first crack. And hopefully, if the show's successful, it's kind of a little feather. It's sort of like, well, we kind of nailed it. And a lot of people and it's not me in any way that, I'm not acting, I'm not writing. It's the show itself. But at least if it got people to maybe tune in, that was a good thing. And for some odd reason, I've worked on a lot of pilots or a lot of season ones. It's hard because in one sense, not even the creators really know how they should sell the show. They know the show. They probably know, I'm sure, how the first season is going to end. And they probably maybe even have a Bible or an arc for the, 4 or 5 seasons. But things sort of change as the show develops and as they, gain a audience, and then the audience prefers a certain character that maybe they didn't think about before, and they get written, and then it changes, the ad for the next season. I could allude to one in particular, which was The Sopranos. How do you sell The Sopranos and nobody knows what it's about? The studio knows the people behind it are really good, but you don't really, you could sell it that way. You could say, well, this is their, they've done these things that you've seen before, Life on the Streets. And yeah, David Chase was very adamant about using the title, and you could work around it. You could keep the story the same, everything the same by, the family's going to be called The Sopranos, and that's it. But should the show be called that? And so getting back to you're saying about your retitling and all that exploration. Well, it was a real problem for HBO. I mean, what is this, a show about a family of opera singers? That's literally, no,
right. That's a real thing.
I mean, that's the first, they're not trying to be, sound stupid. They're just trying to look at it from, right. As a normal viewer would, look at, I even, it's like, oh, that's, that's her name. And I read the script, and as I remember, I don't think they revealed the last scene, or maybe it was rewritten. And the thing was, as you may remember, it really kind of it was maybe a tad lighter than it certainly turned out to be. And I think they were one of the main hooks of the show, as you may recall, was that you have this leader of a successful
mafia.
New Jersey mafia operation. And, we went through all the titles, the Made Man, Made in America, all these things that, not The Sopranos, right? It's going to be about the mobsters, or it's going to be about his problem. And the basic, hook was his problem of dealing with his own family, his family, the mob family, and the pressures, and him going to a psychiatrist, which that was the big thing. And Lauren Bracco was known. And so she was kind of a big character because she had been in Goodfellas, and James Gandolfini had been in some character roles and not really known, and so she was a big part of it. And then it was sort of, well, then that's not really what the show. You kind of, after the first initial violence, and then as people got more and more into all his family characters, it became this show then about his life and
His
the
family.
two sides and all that thing, and be fleshed out. But in the beginning, it was kind of like, well, you got this character, and he's gonna be in therapy, and they bought it, and rightly so. But it was like, well, how do we, so they wanted to go with the mob thing right away, and then I really don't want to sell that. So he stuck by the original title, and of
David did.
course,
David Chase stuck by the
did.
title.
And it just made sense later. Obviously, everyone knows what it is. No one cares that it's the Sopranos. They're not a family of opera singers, and it's a anyway, to answer your question. And it's a very involved process, especially titles, because it should say so much. It should nail it pretty well. And
well,
that's
that's really a great example, because to your point, the Sopranos does sound like some other kind of show, and you don't want it to feel like a bread and butter crime drama with mobsters that's on the tail of Goodfellas and all these other movies. So what distinguishes it? And I can see that be a very complicated and difficult task. And then you have the showrunner who's insisting, rightly so, he knew something. And that's where the executives have to trust the creator, that there's a reason I named it The Sopranos. There's a tone to their name that is going to be in the show. But it's very legitimate to think that can be confusing and turn people off. And so you came up with, if one family doesn't kill you, the other family will. Your job is, pressure filled to deliver. And also when you deliver that, it's repeat business. If you can come up with a tagline, like if one family doesn't kill you, the other family will, where there's lots of complications with a filmmaker, a creator who wants to keep the title, the studio's like, this is really confusing. We want this, we don't want that. That's a good job. I mean, that's a job that's going to keep on giving.
It's like the old saying, if you enjoy what you do, you don't work a day in your life. And I genuinely feel that way. I mean, there are times, deadlines varies, and it could be anywhere from a week or 2 weeks. Actually, 2 weeks is too long for me. I like to get things done in a session and then go back and edit, but it could be within a few hours. we have what they call a fire drill. And so can you call it noon? Can you get it to us by the end of the day, 5 o'clock or something? And that's a little less fun. But the thing I wanted to mention was, and I keep going back to sort of the selling part, because as I mentioned, it is show business. And so there's the creative side in all aspects of the business. And then there's the craft side, getting it done in time, whether you're building a set or something that it doesn't fall and what have you. The craft for me is to have resources, things that I've thought of before. In a notebook, I had a writer friend who worked in television, who said, keep a file. Keep a file of things you think of, keep a file of things you think worked well. It could be advertising, it could be movies. And I was going to mention earlier, most of the entertainment breaks down into maybe 5 or 6 different categories. So I'll have a file on drama, and one on horror, and one on romance, and one on comedy, and one on like thriller, adventure, thrillers. And if I need to jumpstart something, if I need to springboard, I could go to that. And if I need to do it, and especially in that quick of a time, just to kind of get things going. So yeah, there's a little bit of pressure to make sure you don't, F it up, and that you get most, bang for your buck.
So do you work as a freelancer, do you work with different boutique advertising agencies? They call you up and say, hey, this is what we're doing, or does the studio call you directly? How does that work?
It could be one or another, or both sometimes. But generally, I would say it's the boutique, because that's what they do. And, and again, alluding back to the old studio system where they had in-house, creative agencies doing the one sheets, the posters, and doing their trailers and cutting all that. They gave a lot of that up, again, I think to save money, maybe open different areas in the studio. A lot of, it's a huge thing with international sales now and just marketing and not marketing so much, but distribution rather. That's a huge, huge thing. The studio generally is in charge of handing it out to the boutiques and the boutiques to me. And occasionally it'll be the studio itself.
I don't want to embarrass you, Rocco, but I'm really impressed with a lot of the taglines you've done.
Great.
And
Okay.
I'm kind of excited to just say the tagline first and then give a little pause and let the audience guess what the show is. Okay, so the first one is Take What's Yours. Take What's Yours. Now, that's a big show. This was for season 1 of Succession. Just tell us quickly, what you were thinking of. What is that? What does Take What's Yours conjure for the audience? What were you aiming for?
Conflict, what it drives every story, right? And, you can't tell, you can, if you want to tell too much. And like I had mentioned earlier, in the 70s or 80s, they had a paragraph, but, they want it quick and to the point. And I think that's it. That's
conflict.
It,
conflict. Well, that's gonna come up a lot, and it's certainly gonna come up with the next title that everybody's gonna know. War is Coming. Everybody knows that's Game of Thrones, but the difference is this was for season 2, so people had watched this first season, and tell us what the thinking was there.
Again, in this particular case, it goes and it's similarly done in successive seasons. And it really is the arc of the season. And so what do we want to put out there?
Right.
So they've been teasing war, and now war's coming. And then it's, the next season is, this one takes the throne or something. And
got it.
Building on that story arc, which the writers probably came up with, 10 seasons, and then they're all trying to hit a certain message.
Okay, this tagline's one of my favorite. Life's not a word, it's a sentence. Life's not a word, it's a sentence. It was a while ago, but that was Oz for season 1. Yeah. That's very clever.
Thank you. And it's just basically, the show is Oz, and it's a little bit, I don't want to say it's light because it's about prison, but at the same time, I think, and especially with HBO, premium, hopefully clever, intelligent, right? That's what they want. So
yeah, and you pick it up right away, as you do with this next one. Waiting sucks. Waiting right. Sucks. Right. True Blood, season 3. What was the first season? Do you know what the first season tag was? The second season? And
yeah, I wish I did. I know they're very short and very clever. It basically, I don't know if it was something like Everything's Hotter Down South. I'm not sure what it was, but they were very clever because it had that campy feel. Of course, by this actual point, there was a delay, and in their season, it was going to. Instead of coming in 6 months later or 8 months later, it took I can't remember what the reason was, but it took 12 months or a year and a half or whatever. And so that was that message. But, they may have even had another one for that season that explains something else. But there are these also, one of the big points is that there are a lot of teaser things. And that's, one of the things they did with True Blood was doing a lot of ads, like just showing a coffee pot and said, well, it's really, with red liquid, and it's it's time for a cup of Joe, right? So we had all these funny allusions to the show, clever, campy, and they would put those and wild post and be like just taking smaller versions of the poster, putting them on a telephone pole or something, and it would get it out there. And there's so many different techniques now that you can do, obviously. Online. So
and all those shows I mentioned, along with The Sopranos, which we spoke about earlier, are HBO. Is that just luck of the draw, or does HBO have a good sense of what you do, or do you have the same ad agency?
Probably don't know me from Adam. But I think what it is, the boutiques, to my own a little bit, I think maybe they think, well, he can maybe come up with something that is a little, I guess they say clever, or a little bit intelligent, and so that is in my favor for shows like the ones you mentioned, HBO. And I think the thing that I would say about myself and other successful people that do this is, and it could be artists as well and designers as well as writers, is being able to do a lot of different type of shows. So it could be broad comedy, clever, witty comedy, independent movies.
Yeah, well, here's one of your comedies, and the tagline is "Smart is the new sexy." And "Smart is the new sexy" is that show is one of the biggest, most successful comedies ever. And of course, we're talking about The Big Bang Theory. And so
I had
that,
no idea what it's going to be any different from any other show. It's the show itself, obviously, but it just gives the idea. Well, these are intelligent people, and it's not going to be it's going to be a sitcom, but not a super silly. I mean, obviously the people in it are all very educated, and so you're getting something a little bit different.
well, Rocco, I came to you. Obviously, we talked about The Second Wife and Wicked, but because of my experience in working with people like you and ad agencies for Wicked and There's Something About Mary, that when I started writing my novels, The Looking Glass Wars, and I knew that obviously it's a reimagining of Alice in Wonderland, so I wanted to find a way to sort of capture the history of Alice in Wonderland and culture and redefine it and reposition it for a contemporary audience. And the title of books is really important, but it really just falls on the author. And the publisher, goes along with what the author wants because it's really very individual. Often the publisher, most of the time, the publisher will take control of the title of the book cover, and they do all the designs. It's all in-house. They come up with the taglines. I had a lot of really great artwork from Hollywood concept artists. So my whole approach to marketing my books was based on the Hollywood model. So I always knew The Looking Glass Wars was going to be the title because it speaks to something very familiar, stepping through a looking glass, but it adds that dynamic of war and something ominous, and there's something bigger going on. But I also thought I really needed a tagline. And the tagline that I ended up landing on was "Fantasy just declared war on reality." So that became really important. And then for the next book, Seeing Red, I knew the title. And then for the third book, I was struggling for a title. And then, I came to you to help on all of these, on, a number of these titles. So I think my question to you is, how much did your knowledge or your sense of Alice and pop culture influence any of those titles you came up with?
Well, definitely Alice being a stronger figure, a stronger girl, rather than being swept around by all these characters. She's taking charge. She wants to get her kingdom back. She's in control. And so I think I haven't seen the list for a while, but I have a feeling that a lot of them were shorter. And I think it's just trying to get the idea of, just a little shorter, a little bit more punch. So yeah, it's a little combination of all of what you said, your input, things I knew about the original story, but more specifically about your interpretation of the story, going back to some, file and seeing if there was something that I put down that, could work. Exploration.
There was, and that's true. So, for instance, there was Burning Borders,
Okay.
which I really like, and I particularly like it today for whatever reason. I thought, oh, that's an interesting. You also had cross border. There was border reigns, border power. But you're right. The exploration is really great because a lot of times that exploration will produce phraseology or a couple of words that I can use in the marketing of social media that allows for a little variation on what the story is. So, given that, why don't you share your history with Alice in Wonderland? How did you come to Alice? Was it through the books or the movies or something else?
Actually, through the Disney film, which was
The
re-released,
animated
I think,
film. Wait, the animated
the
film.
animated
Yeah,
film.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, not yeah. There's many versions, and was the animated Disney animated film, which of course you kept everything a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
There's only a little bit that I read through the Looking Glass, but there's such classic elements to it. That's why it's continually retold. But the story itself is classic, and you see reverberations of it everywhere. So I think, for me, it was the initial, and then your reinvention, I should say, of that story.
Well, thank you very much. And Rocco, it's really fun to hear these stories and what went into it. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. Yeah,
All
my
right,
pleasure.
later. Bye.
Whenever.